At the wedding, she ran away in her wedding dress. She sat in He Lin's passenger seat, facing countless media cameras, and said to me apologetically, "I'm sorry, He Chuan. I've fallen in love with your brother." I asked her, "Does he love you too?" Her eyes filled with joy as she answered, "Of course, if he didn't love me, he wouldn't have come to steal me away." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. He Lin didn't love her. He just enjoyed the thrill of snatching prey from my grasp. And I had loved her for 8 whole years. When Jiang Xia abandoned the guests and threw off her veil to run, I was stunned. "Jiang Xia, are you joking? Today was supposed to be our wedding day." Out of respect, almost all of my relatives were present, and her parents were on stage, waiting for us to serve tea together. But she left me at the altar for my stepbrother. I chased after them and blocked their car at the entrance. Jiang Xia frowned, her eyes filled with annoyance. "He Chuan, you can't force love. Stop pestering me. I've already made it clear that I don't love you. I want to be with He Lin." "Be with him?" I laughed in anger. "Do you know he's just playing with you?" Jiang Xia bristled like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. "He Chuan, enough. Haven't you slandered him enough in front of me? As his older brother, you don't take care of him, but instead you backstab him. He Chuan, I'm so disappointed in you." As she spoke, she didn't see the provocative and playful look He Lin gave me. How ridiculous. They were the ones who made me the clown of this wedding. Yet I became the villain. Jiang Xia's elopement disgraced the He family. My father's face was grim, and my stepmother sobbed, "I'm sorry, He Chuan. I really didn't know He Lin would do this. Otherwise, I definitely wouldn't have let him act so recklessly." I remained silent, my face dark, wanting to hear how she would explain this away. Ever since He Lin was young, she had always found excuses for his wrongdoings. Sure enough, I heard her defending him. But then again, "He Chuan, your brother did you a favor. Jiang Xia choosing to run away shows she doesn't love you at all. Isn't it better to see her true colors now than to catch her cheating after marriage?" I gave a sarcastic laugh and ignored her. Jiang Xia's parents came over, looking at me with heartache, apologizing. I respected them, but I also realized clearly that Jiang Xia and I were over. I took out the ring box from my pocket and handed it to them. "This was bought by Jiang Xia. Please give it to her for me." The rings weren't expensive, but they were meaningful. They were Jiang Xia's first gift to me, bought with 2 months of her salary after graduation. I had always treasured them. It was a pity I wouldn't need them anymore. The guests were still waiting in the banquet hall. I took the microphone and walked onto the stage. "Everyone, due to certain circumstances, today's wedding is canceled. It will be changed to my personal promotion celebration. I hope you all enjoy yourselves." Come to think of it, I should thank He Lin. Because he stole my bride? No, ex-girlfriend. My father, feeling sorry for me, promoted me 2 levels directly to the position of branch company president. And He Lin, he was still just a rookie in the company. I saw my stepmother's face change in the audience. After the banquet, I rushed to the company. I needed to hand over my current work before heading to the branch office in another city to take up my new position. My phone vibrated incessantly, but I didn't want to answer it. It wasn't until the next day that Jiang Xia came to the company to confront me. She accused me. "He Chuan, don't go too far. I was the one who wronged you. Don't take it out on He Lin." I was stunned. What did I do? She yelled at me. "Do you know he was almost beaten to death last night?" I immediately understood. This was another one of He Lin's self-directed dramas. Perhaps the sarcastic smile on my face stung her, as Jiang Xia's expression became some ferocious. "What are you laughing at?" Looking into her eyes, I asked, one word at a time, "Did He Lin personally tell you that I sent those people?" Jiang Xia faltered, and no, he didn't say. "Then why do you suspect me?" "Jiang Xia, I thought after 8 years together, you would understand me a little." Jiang Xia opened her mouth, seemingly wanting to explain. But I was busy and didn't want to waste any more time with her. "Jiang Xia, I've thought it through. Since you've chosen He Lin, I wish you both happiness. I hope you have a happy marriage and many children. From now on, you go your way, and I'll go mine. We have nothing to do with each other anymore." Jiang Xia took a deep breath, as if she couldn't believe my words. "He Chuan, don't say things out of anger. We've known each other for so many years. Even if we can't be husband and wife, can't we even be friends? I was about to say it wasn't necessary when Jiang Xia's phone rang. She put on speakerphone, and He Lin's voice came through. Brother, are you blaming me? I'm sorry. If it weren't for me, your wedding wouldn't have. I know it's shameless of me to say this, but brother, Jiang Xia and I truly love each other. Can you give us your blessing? I'm begging you. The male voice on the phone was weak, humble, and pitiful. Jiang Xia's eyes reddened, but I just wanted to laugh. Okay, I give you my blessing, I said. Since we were young, have I ever denied you anything you wanted? This time is certainly no exception. He Lin fell silent. Jiang Xia's eyes widened. He Lin asked again, Brother, can you please not go to the branch office? It's so far from home. I don't want to not see you all year round. If you don't want to see me, I can leave. I chuckled softly. Don't misunderstand. My transfer to another city is purely for work reasons, not because of you two. As your older brother, I sincerely wish you a long and happy life together. Jiang Xia tugged on my sleeve and said, He Chuan, don't lie. I know you can't let me go so easily. I pulled my hand free and gently shook my head. You're wrong, Jiang Xia. The moment you chose He Lin, I stopped loving you. I had warned Jiang Xia many times. He Lin was erratic, sinister, and ruthless, not a good person. But I couldn't understand why Jiang Xia trusted him so completely while starting to doubt me. After all, they had known each other for less than a year. The day they first met, I was there too. That day, Jiang Xia and I had just bought rings and stepped out of the jewelry store when we ran into He Lin. With a face that was deceptively charming, he obediently called Jiang Xia's sister. The look in He Lin's eyes filled me with a deep sense of unease. I knew him too well. While Jiang Xia went to the restroom, I warned him, but he leaned close to my ear, grinning menacingly. Honestly, I have zero interest in a woman with such an ordinary face and unremarkable figure. But who told her to be your girlfriend? Everything you have. I'm going to take it all. My face darkened. After he left, I repeatedly told Jiang Xia to stay away from He Lin. Confused, she asked me why. I said He Lin hated me, just as I despised him. Her mother had ruined my family back then, driving my mom to suicide from depression before shamelessly marrying into the He family. He Lin was only 5 at the time, but his demonic nature was already apparent. He'd sneak into my room, tear up my homework, and smash my study device. Whenever I confronted him, he'd run crying into our father's arms, begging me not to hit him. I hadn't bullied him at all, but no one believed me, because they were convinced that a child couldn't possibly lie. I argued, but the disappointment in my father's eyes told me he didn't want me to make excuses. I thought that after Jiang Xia learned about everything I'd been through, she'd be wary of He Lin. But I later realized I was gravely mistaken. I underestimated He Lin's tactics and overestimated Jiang Xia's trust in me. Around that time, my father, wanting to train me, handed me an important project. While I was swamped with work, Jiang Xia came to me. She asked, Are you still shorthanded for this project? He Lin said he'd like to intern under you during the summer. I was utterly shocked. He Lin had ulterior motives. Letting him meddle in the project was like inviting a tiger into the fold. But what stunned me even more was how Jiang Xia had gotten so close to He Lin without me noticing. Perhaps my grim expression startled her. Jiang Xia quickly explained, We didn't talk about much. He just asked me to check with you. Hearing He Lin's name from Jiang Xia's mouth sent a wave of panic through me, and my tone unconsciously sharpened. Didn't I tell you to stay away from him? Jiang Xia looked troubled. He Chuan, honestly, I feel like He Lin isn't as bad as you say. I think he's got a good temper, gentle and polite. Could there be some misunderstanding between you two? At that moment, I stared deeply into Jiang Xia's eyes. I had a premonition. The balance in her heart had already tipped toward He Lin. The night before the wedding, we had a lot of fights. All because of He Lin. I don't know what she was thinking. Even after I repeatedly refused, she still wanted to play peacemaker between He Lin and me. She said, He Lin is innocent. You can't blame him for your mother's death. He was only a 4 or 5-year-old child at the time. It was just kids roughhousing Why take it so seriously? Even if you resented him, after so many years, you should let it go. He Chuan, you should be more mature. But how could my hatred for He Lin be dispelled by her few words? She clearly knew nothing, yet she expected me to be magnanimous. 7 years old, He Lin pushed me down the stairs from behind. I broke both legs and lay in bed for over a month. But everyone thought I had fallen accidentally. 9 years old, he snuck into my room while I was at school and stole the crystal necklace my mother left me. It was the only thing I had left of her. When I found him, he was holding a hammer, smiling at me. The delicate necklace was already smashed to dust. I lunged at him, punching and kicking, wanting to bite a chunk of flesh from his body. The house servants quickly pulled us apart. Before I could regain my footing, my stepmother slapped me across the face. I was dizzy, my lips split, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. I heard her roar, "Why didn't you die with your mother?" When my father came home, he slapped me hard and locked me in a dark room for 2 days without food or water. He said I shouldn't disrupt the family's harmony over a necklace. I wanted to say it wasn't just a necklace. It was the only memory I had of my mother. But I didn't argue. I lowered my head and sincerely apologized, because I realized that the best way to fight back against my stepmother and He Lin was to gain my father's trust. So I learned to be silent, to pretend. I learned how to be the son my father wanted. Later, I worked hard and got into the top university in the country. After graduating and joining the company, I worked day and night, desperately pushing projects. In less than a year, I became well known within the company. Anyone who mentioned me would add, "Director, he has done a great job raising his son." As for He Lin, because he didn't do well on the college entrance exam, he only got into an ordinary university. If it weren't for my father's connections, he wouldn't even be able to get his foot in the door of the company. And so, I finally became the son my father was most proud of. Jiang Xia said, "I was narrow-minded and hoped I would let go of the past, but I've endured and bided my time for so many years, hoping that one day I could witness their retribution. How could I possibly give up now?" I told Jiang Xia that going to work out of town wasn't because of her and He Lin. She didn't believe me, insisting that I was throwing a tantrum. But I didn't lie to them. Even if Jiang Xia hadn't run away from the wedding, I would have proactively applied to transfer to the branch office for 2 years of training after the marriage. Because my father is getting old, he urgently needs a successor to openly take his place in the company. And I have full confidence that in 2 years, I will, with the most outstanding resume, become the youngest executive director in the company's history. The flight landed smoothly. The branch office sent a car to pick me up. Along with the driver came a vice president named Hou Shuyue. She wore a light blue casual suit, her eyes bright, her every move giving off a clean and efficient impression. When she spoke to me, her eyes held a hint of sympathy. I knew what she was thinking. The news of Jiang Xia running away from the wedding had spread quickly. The branch office staff probably already heard that the newly arrived president was a pitiful man betrayed by his fiancée and stepbrother. But it didn't matter. Those looks of ridicule or mockery would all become my stepping stones. I have to say, Hou Shuyue is very capable and efficient. In just a few days, with her help, I quickly familiarized myself with the branch office. In the evening, I had dinner with her in the company cafeteria. Resting her chin in her hand, she suddenly said to me, "Your fiancé's betrayal was not a wise move." I looked up, meeting her gaze. "At least in my opinion, He Lin is far inferior to you. You know, I actually met you 2 years ago." I put down my chopsticks, a puzzled look on my face. "You too?" "Yes, you and He Lin." Hou Shuyue curved her lips into a smile. "Didn't your He family hold a celebration banquet back then?" My father was a business partner, so I went along. I carefully studied her face, finally finding a familiar figure in the depths of my memory. I showed a surprised expression. Hou Shuyue smiled. "You finally remember me," I said helplessly. "You've changed a lot since then. If it weren't for you helping me back then, I would have been so embarrassed." I vaguely remembered that at the celebration banquet, a young girl had her drink spilled all over her by a waiter. To prevent her from being exposed, I casually handed her my jacket. I really didn't expect that girl to be Hou Shuyue. She smiled slyly. "After I got back, I asked around about you, and found out you had a fiancé you'd been with for several years. I was so heartbroken. I lowered my head helplessly. Don't tease me. She shrugged her shoulders and said frankly, I'm not teasing you. I'm serious. I pretended not to hear her words and calmly picked up my chopsticks to eat. Seeing that I didn't respond, Hou Shuyue muttered softly, since you and her are impossible anyway, why not consider me? After dinner, we walked out of the restaurant and took the elevator together. In the quiet elevator, she silently tugged on my sleeve. I rubbed my temples and said to her, sorry, I don't have any plans to find a girlfriend in the near future. As soon as the elevator doors opened, she darted out without looking back. Her voice lingered in the air. Then I'll ask you again when you do. Afterward, I threw myself into my busy work. Overtime and late nights were common, and business trips were even more frequent. Except for occasionally seeing Jiang Xia's photos in my WeChat moments, I had almost completely cut off contact with her. I looked at her selfies. In the pictures, she and He Lin were smiling happily. I suddenly wanted to know how long He Lin would keep up this act. Time passed quickly, and soon it was the end of the year. My father called me several times, urging me to finish my work early and come home for the new year. But I still booked a flight for New Year's Eve. I was speechless, not knowing how to respond. Her bold and unrestrained personality was completely different from Jiang Xia's. I was often startled by her sudden ideas. I helplessly changed the subject, see if there's anything missing in the room, and I'll have someone send it over. After settling Hou Shuyue in, I returned to my room alone. Jiang Xia quickly called me. He Chuan, are you serious? You've known each other for less than 3 months, and you're getting married? He Chuan, I advise you to calm down. Marriage is a lifetime commitment. Don't make such a rash decision because of me. Her tone was anxious, but I found it absurd. I asked her, Jiang Xia, I'm curious, in what capacity are you calling me? The breathing on the other end of the line hitched. I continued to ask, friend or ex-girlfriend? Jiang Xia gritted her teeth. He Chuan, I'm calling you because I care about you. I chuckled. Then I thank you for your concern. But this time you're really wrong, I told her calmly. Strictly speaking, I've known her for quite a while. We met 2 years ago, but only reconnected after my recent transfer. Jiang Xia was silent for a moment. Do you really like her? Standing on the balcony, in the whistling cold wind, I heard my own voice. Who wouldn't like someone like her? Okay, I understand. I don't know if I heard wrong, but her voice seemed to tremble slightly. But it had nothing to do with me. Hou Shuyue stayed at my house for several days. To fulfill my duties as a host, I accompanied her out every day, going sightseeing and having fun. She provided me with a perfect excuse to avoid staying at home, constantly facing those annoying faces. On the 5th day of the Lunar New Year, we happened to run into He Lin and Jiang Xia on the street. Seeing them walking towards us hand in hand, I wasn't surprised at all. I knew this was likely He Lin's last gamble with Jiang Xia. He Lin feigned surprise and greeted us cheerfully. Brother, Miss Hou, what are you doing here? I said, what a coincidence. Jiang Xia's gaze fell on Hou Shuyue. Hou Shuyue gave a bright smile, letting her look her over. I didn't expect we'd meet so soon, Miss Jiang. Hou Shuyue extended her hand, her attitude friendly. Jiang Xia shook her hand, the smile on her face a little stiff. Knowing her for so many years, I could guess what she was thinking. Jiang Xia's family background wasn't good, and the hardships of her life had made her sensitive and competitive. Standing in front of a glamorous woman, her unease would involuntarily reveal itself, even if she was wearing designer brands. Hello. Hou Shuyue's natural composure made her seem awkward. It's almost noon. Why don't the 4 of us have lunch together? He Lin enthusiastically suggested. I heard from my mother that you're going back to work tomorrow. Hou Shuyue turned to me for my opinion. I smiled and nodded. Okay. The restaurant we chose was a private dining establishment in the city center. During the meal, He Lin constantly served Jiang Xia food, poured her water, and handed her napkins, acting extremely attentive. Noticing my gaze on them, He Lin suddenly paused, his expression awkward and guilty. Brother, I smiled and interrupted what he was about to say. Don't mind me, continue. I just think you two have a very good relationship, nothing else. Jiang Xia looked at me intently, but I had already looked away. After dinner, I accompanied Hou Shuyue to the restroom. While waiting for her in the corridor, Jiang Xia slowly walked up to me, looking like she wanted to say something but hesitated. I looked around. Where's He Lin? He went to get the car. Jiang Xia bit her lip and took a deep breath. He Chuan, I think Miss Ho is very nice, but she's not suitable for you. She doesn't even know what you don't like to eat. Just now at the dinner table, I saw her put several slices of carrots in your bowl. He Chuan, don't you? I frowned deeply. Jiang Xia, you're crossing the line. You're He Lin's girlfriend now. I don't need your commentary on my relationship with Shuyue. Seeing me turn to leave, Jiang Xia panicked and quickly grabbed my arm. He Chuan, that's not what I meant. I just don't want you to be impulsive. Before I could pull away, a roar exploded nearby. What are you doing? He Lin's voice suddenly rang out, and I turned to see him standing at the other end of the corridor, his face extremely ugly. Jiang Xia was startled. He Lin, weren't you in the parking lot? He Lin's eyes were filled with disappointment and anger, and he snarled at us. If I hadn't forgotten my car keys, how would I have seen you two pulling and tugging here? It's not like that. Jiang Xia tried to explain. He Lin, listen to me, Jiang Xia, I saw it with my own eyes. What else do you have to say? He Lin's eyes were red, his face full of pain. If you can't let go of my brother, why did you agree to be with me? Jiang Xia frantically explained. He Lin, you misunderstood me. At this moment, Hou Shuyue walked out of the restroom. What happened? He Lin pointed at Jiang Xia and me, his lips trembling with anger. Brother, Jiang Xia, you two have disappointed me so much. He turned and left without looking back. Jiang Xia hurriedly chased after him, the two of them tugging at each other. I watched He Lin's retreating figure, my heart completely unmoved. This was his usual trick, playing the victim, shifting the blame onto others, and then rightfully forcing them to apologize. Hou Shuyue quietly asked me what was wrong. I gave her a reassuring look, then found the restaurant manager and asked him to send me a copy of the corridor surveillance footage. After returning home, the living room atmosphere was heavy. My father and stepmother were both sitting on the sofa, their faces grim. Hou Shuyue cast a worried look at me. I told her to go upstairs first. After changing my shoes, I walked up to them. Dad. My father snorted coldly, his face tinged with anger. He Chuan, I thought you didn't need anyone to worry about you anymore, but I didn't expect you to act so recklessly. The smile on my lips faded a little, and I pretended to be ignorant and asked, Dad, what do you mean by that? He Chuan, it's not that your dad wants to criticize you, but what you did was really wrong. My stepmother said with a worried look, since you already have Miss Ho by your side, why are you still pestering Jiang Xia? Don't you know she's Xiao Lin's girlfriend? I frowned. Andy, you've wronged me. Jiang Xia and I just had a simple lunch together at noon. We barely spoke a few words. How did it become me pestering her? I made a strange expression. Did He Lin tell you that? Seeing that I was shifting the topic to He Lin, my stepmother quickly explained. No, I asked him because he looked upset before. I interrupted my stepmother, looked up at my father, and said word by word, Dad, do you think it's my fault too? My father's breathing grew heavier, and his sharp, authoritative eyes scrutinized me. I met his gaze without flinching. We were in a silent standoff. After an unknown amount of time, he finally slowly opened his mouth. So, we misunderstood you. Ignoring my stepmother's frustrated expression, I smiled and said, Dad, I insisted on marrying Jiang Xia before because I didn't want to betray our many years of feelings. But now, we have both found someone who can make each other happier. What reason do I have not to cherish it? A smile finally appeared on my father's wrinkled face. You're a smart boy. You need to understand that, whether it's appearance, character, or family background, Shuyue far surpasses Jiang Xia. The Hou family can greatly help your future development. I nodded, echoing his words. But the next second, my stepmother still stubbornly said, But Xiao Lin told me personally that he saw you and Jiang Xia hugging. I frowned slightly. Is that so? It seems I can only find the surveillance video from that time to dispel Andy's doubts. Fortunately, the owner of the restaurant at noon is my high school classmate. It's not difficult to ask him for a copy of the surveillance footage. Wait a moment, I'll call him and ask. Saying that, I took out my phone from my pocket and walked to the side to make the call. Nonsense. My father scolded, glared at my stepmother, and then told me to sit down. He Chuan, no need to call. It's such a small matter, and you're bothering others. Aren't you ashamed? Since my father had spoken, my stepmother could only swallow her anger. After returning to my room, I received a text message from Jiang Xia. He Chuan, can you do me a favor? He Lin is not answering my calls or replying to my messages. Can you help me explain to him? I know this request might be difficult for you, but I don't know who else can help me contact him. Even through the phone screen, I could feel Jiang Xia's anxiety and panic. Unfortunately, her wish was destined to be unfulfilled, because He Lin, in order to get rid of her, even found such an impeccable excuse for breaking up. Okay, I agreed to Jiang Xia. Then I knocked on He Lin's door. He Lin wasn't surprised to see me. He asked flippantly, "What can I do for you, big brother?" I looked at him and said calmly, "Jiang Xia wants you to answer her call." He gave a sarcastic smile. I thought it was something important. Turns out it's for that woman. Brother, are you acting as her spokesperson now? Don't tell me you want to get back together with her. What's so good about her? She's ugly and has a bad temper. If it weren't for you, I would have dumped her long ago. He shrugged, feigning distress. Speaking of which, if you really can't let her go, I suppose I could reluctantly give her back to you. But in exchange, you give Miss Hou to me. I stared at him silently, then pulled out my phone, which was currently in a call. Talk to her yourself. The phone screen showed the call had been connected for almost 3 minutes. He Lin's expression changed instantly. The other end of the line was silent. He Lin took the phone and forced himself to explain, Xia, what I said just now was all in anger. Don't take it seriously. I couldn't help but smile. He Lin froze, then immediately realized the person on the phone isn't Jiang Xia. Right, it's not Jiang Xia. I nodded. It's Dad. Father flew into a rage, called He Lin downstairs, and slapped him twice. Having been in the business world for decades, how could he not see through He Lin's intentions? He Lin gritted his teeth and didn't dare retaliate. His stepmother cried anxiously beside him. Father scolded, I've been wondering why you haven't made any progress since joining the company for more than half a year. It turns out you've been focusing on this kind of thing. How could I have given birth to such a useless thing? Look at yourself. Is there anything about you that is better than your brother? These words seemed to strike a nerve with He Lin, and he suddenly exploded. Yes, He Lin, am useless. I'm just not as good as him. Are you satisfied now? His stepmother couldn't stop him and cried out anxiously. Father raged, you bastard. You dare talk back? I stood on the stairs, looking down at this farce. These past few years, He Lin has been a constant disappointment to Father. After he failed the college entrance exam, Father originally planned to send him abroad for further studies, but He Lin flatly refused. Father didn't know the reason, but I had overheard it. His stepmother was worried that after He Lin went abroad, I would take the opportunity to fight for the shares and property under Father's name. So, she kept He Lin firmly by Father's side, not letting him leave a single step. I had heard her say through the door, "What's the use of a prestigious university diploma these days? Whether or not you can enter the company is up to your father. He's the chairman. Who dares to disobey him? Don't worry. I'll arrange everything for you before you graduate. You don't have to worry about him. I've already arranged people in the company. His life won't be easy." His stepmother's schemes were obvious. She wanted to trap me at the bottom before my wings were fully grown. Of course, I wouldn't let her have her way. After joining the company, I spent a long time finding the people my stepmother had planted. After they were fired one by one for various legitimate reasons, my stepmother finally realized something was wrong. But she didn't dare to make a fuss, let alone tell Father. Even if she knew it was all my doing, she could only swallow her anger. The arguing downstairs continued. I turned back to my room and packed up the information I'd collected recently, sending it to Jiang Xia. For the sake of all the years we'd spent together, I decided to help her one last time. For the past 2 months, He Lin had been under my surveillance. So, I knew he frequently went to nightclubs and bars behind Jiang Xia's back, took different girls to hotels, and even several times just crawled out of another woman's bed before meeting Jiang Xia. All the photos and hotel records were enough for her to see He Lin's true colors. Jiang Xia quickly replied with a question mark. I was concise. Don't you want to know what He Lin is really like? The message sank like a stone. Until evening, when Jiang Xia finally replied. I'm sorry, He Chuan. This message stunned me for a long time. After hearing her apology, I found that my mood wasn't as joyful as I'd imagined. When Jiang Xia first left me, I often thought that if it weren't for He Lin, we might have grown old together. But I realized at this moment that the cracks in our relationship had probably appeared long ago. It's just that neither of us noticed, until the crack grew wider and wider, giving He Lin the opportunity to step in. After Hou Shuyue and I flew back to the branch office, I immersed myself in my work, devoting all my energy to it. Although He Lin was no longer qualified to be my rival, for the sake of the company, I still couldn't relax. 30 years ago, my parents started this company from scratch, building it together. As their only son, I naturally had to shoulder the responsibility. 6 months later, arranged by Hou Shuyue, I met her parents. They were full of praise for me, believing I was a man worthy of entrusting their daughter to for life. Upon hearing the news, my father happily flew over from home. Thus, witnessed by both sets of parents, Hou Shuyue and I quickly settled on our engagement. Before returning, my father specifically told me that he had introduced a good girl to He Lin, the daughter of his old comrade in arms. I put on a happy expression at the time. I said, I'm so happy for him. But I thought sarcastically, He Lin doesn't have that kind of luck. A few days later, He Lin was caught red-handed by the police for drug use at a nightclub. After this news broke, countless people were shocked, countless curses flooded the internet, and the company's stock price plummeted. My father was furious, so angry that he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and was rushed to the hospital. I hurried back from out of town and took on the heavy responsibility. Half a month later, everything gradually returned to calm. After my father woke up, I talked with him for a long time. I said He Lin had crossed the bottom line of the country and the people, and I was powerless regarding the consequences he would face. My father was silent for a long time, then praised me for doing the right thing. He said he couldn't let He Lin ruin the decades-long foundation of the He family. I lowered my head, concealing the profound meaning that flashed in my eyes. He Lin was sent to mandatory rehab. Upon hearing the news, my stepmother seemed to age 10 years overnight. She glared at me fiercely, saying that I was behind it all. I didn't deny it, nor did I nod. I simply told her to pack her things and get out of my mother's house. She had enjoyed my mother's life for free for over 10 years. I felt I had been generous enough. I brought my father back from the hospital. He looked at the empty living room and asked where my stepmother was. I said that because of He Lin's situation, my stepmother resented me and chose to move out. My father's face darkened, and he never mentioned her again. After that, he urged me to quickly hand over the affairs of the branch company and take over his position ahead of schedule. In fact, even if he hadn't said anything, I had planned to take his place on the board. He was old enough, it was time for him to step back. It didn't take long for me to take over the majority of his shares, combined with what my mother left me before she died. I became the company's largest shareholder. The night I signed the share transfer agreement, I stood in the top floor office of the company, overlooking the entire city. It had taken me nearly 20 years to remove those disgusting people from my life. Later, I found a random excuse and sent my father to an ordinary nursing home in another city, restricting his freedom and cutting off all channels of contact with the outside world. My father looked at me with shock and fear. He seemed unable to believe that the man standing before him was his own son. He asked me why. I said, "You brought this all on yourself. More than 20 years ago, wasn't this how you treated my mother?" The mistress and her bastard son showed up at our door. My mother couldn't bear the humiliation and asked you for a divorce. But for the sake of your reputation, you told everyone she was on a business trip while secretly imprisoning her on the top floor of the villa for over half a year. Do you know how it felt when I came home from school one day and saw my mother jump from the roof and die in front of me? My father's face was ashen. He couldn't say a word. I chuckled. Did you think you could keep me in the dark forever? I kept a straight face, saying nothing, waiting to hear how she would explain herself. That's right, I replied. Not only do I know, but I will make you all pay the price. 6 months later, my father passed away in the nursing home. The staff member clearing out his belongings handed me a piece of paper. A few lines were written on it. I glanced at it briefly, then tossed it into the brazier, watching it burn to ashes. A belated apology is lighter than a blade of grass. A year later, Hou Shuyue and I got married. That year, during Qingming Festival, I took her to visit my mother's grave. In that small black and white photo, my mother's smile was gentle and graceful. Suddenly, Hou Shuyue tugged at my sleeve. I followed her gaze and saw a familiar figure in the distance. Jiang Xia, holding a bouquet of chrysanthemums, stood by the roadside. Do you want to talk to her? Shuyue asked me. I shook my head and gently took her hand. We turned and left. A light rain began to fall, and a thin mist enveloped the world. As I got into the car, I looked back. That slender figure seemed to still be standing in the rain.